Imagine embarking on a journey, right? But not across continents, across millennia, trying to synthesize, what, 10,000 years of human endeavor, thought, creation, all into one single cohesive story. What kind of ambition does that even take? And what insights could possibly come out of such a monumental undertaking, especially one started and finished during some really tumultuous times in the 20th century?
It's a project that it really stretches the definition of comprehensive, doesn't it? It forces you to wrestle with these huge questions. What does it actually mean to be civilized? And how much does our past, even the bits you think you know inside out, how much does it still shape who we are now and where we're heading?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. Will and Ariel Durant's massive work, The Story of Civilization. And look, this isn't just a book. It's 11 volumes. 11. Crafted over 4 decades. Think about that. 1935 to 1975. It's a huge chunk of a lifetime. It covers roughly 110 centuries of human development, spanning, get this, 13,549 pages. Now, while the title boldly claims to cover both Eastern and Western civilizations, it does, and we'll get into this, lean pretty heavily towards European history. So our mission today isn't just to give you a summary of this colossal thing. We want to unpack how it became such a cultural phenomenon and what lessons, maybe some surprising ones, we can pull from its, ambitious scope and, yeah, its limitations too. We're looking for those aha moments, the ones that light up the big picture of civilization without needing a PhD to grasp it.
Exactly. It's really about understanding the whole process of how history gets told, and maybe more importantly, how it gets consumed by the public. Especially something on this kind of scale. It's like a window into the intellectual vibe of the mid-20th century, What kind of grand stories really clicked with people back then?
Okay, so let's start with the architects themselves. Will and Ariel Durant, and the sheer scale and the credibility behind this book. Will Durant, born 1885, passed away in 81, American philosopher, historian. What's really fascinating, and I think it says a lot about his vision, he earned a PhD, right?
Yeah.
But he deliberately chose not to use the doctor title, not in public life, not on his books. He apparently believed, and I'm paraphrasing here, that it was always the idea itself, not the fancy title delivering it, that mattered. That's a pretty strong stance.
Oh, definitely. That choice, dropping the doctor publicly, it's incredibly telling. It signals right away who he was trying to reach and why. It wasn't about impressing academics. It was about opening doors for a broader public that was genuinely curious and hungry for knowledge. And this commitment to accessibility, it only got stronger when Ariel Durant was formally recognized as co-author. That started with Volume 7, The Age of Reason Begins, back in '61. Her contribution wasn't just tacked on, it was vital. She brought her own perspective, a real collaborative energy. It shaped how people saw the work approachable, yes, but still authoritative. It made it feel like a shared journey, not just one guy's academic project. Their partnership was, famously intertwined in every page.
And their credibility wasn't just built on this partnership. It was cemented by huge public and critical success even before The Story of Civilization was finished. Remember The Story of Philosophy?
Yeah.
That came out way back in 1926. That book was a phenomenon. Sold over 1 million copies in its first year. A philosophy book. Can you imagine that today? It's just staggering.
It really is. And that early success wasn't just about book sales. It proved there was this deep public hunger for serious intellectual stuff if you presented it in a way that was engaging, digestible. That really set the stage. It showed that Durant's had this knack for bridging the gap between complex ideas and the everyday reader. Something a lot of academics, frankly, struggled with. It was kind of their proof of concept that they can make tough subjects compelling. And then, of course, came the big awards. The Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction in '68 for Rousseau and Revolution, the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977. These aren't just shelf decorations. They're major validations, recognition from the top literary and governmental bodies that it says a lot about the respect their work commanded.
And the endorsements they got were just,
Yeah.
wow, so diverse across the whole intellectual and political map, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. We're talking Bertrand Russell, John Dewey,
Right.
figures like that. But then also Presidents Carter, Truman, Reagan, even figures like Clarence Darrow. It wasn't just one camp singing their praises.
That breadth of endorsement is stunning. It almost feels impossible in our, more polarized times. It really shows how widely their work struck a chord, cutting across different beliefs and fields. What does it tell us about the mid-20th century? I think it suggests there's this real yearning for a big picture, a unifying story, some sense of order in a world changing incredibly fast, getting nods from socialists like Russell and Republican presidents. That boosted their credibility immensely, made the book seem almost neutral, universally appealing. It positioned the Durants as these trusted guides for pretty much everyone during that specific time.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the rhetorical compass, sort of the guiding principles behind the work. And the context, the historical crucible it was created in. It started in 1935, right in the thick of the Great Depression, a time of just immense hardship and uncertainty. And it wrapped up in 1975. So after World War II, deep into the Cold War, with the shadow of nuclear war hanging over everything.
That period, that significant global upheaval, as the outline puts it, it absolutely shaped their purpose. You have to imagine starting this incredibly ambitious project with the world economy collapsing around you, and then finishing it after these unprecedented global wars, living with the daily threat of nuclear annihilation. The anxieties, the challenges of their own time, they definitely color the lens through which they looked at history. They weren't just recording the past in a detached way. They were actively digging for lessons, for examples of human resilience, maybe for some kind of light, to offer perspective and hope to people dealing with their own chaotic times. Their historical digging became a kind of response to the present. It wasn't just academic. It was maybe an intellectual lifeline for a generation that had seen so much destruction.
And what's so striking is how deliberately they chose to offer a narrative of hope, a counter-narrative, really. Their explicit mission, they said, was to provide readers with a comprehensive understanding of civilization's achievements as a source of hope and perspective during dark times. Well, Durant specifically said he refused to subscribe to the depressing conclusion of Voltaire and Gibbon that history is the record of the crimes and follies of mankind. That's taking on some heavy hitters there.
That rejection of pure cynicism, it's absolutely central to their work. It really sets them apart. Instead of just dwelling on the disasters, they wanted to show history, also contained, and this is their phrase, the sating sanity of the average family, the labor and love of men and women bearing the stream of life over 1,000 obstacles. The power of framing it that way, especially then, is huge. In a world reeling from war, economic depression, nuclear fear, their insistence on finding that saving sanity, whether in ancient Mesopotamia or the Renaissance, it wasn't just nice, it was almost a radical act. It reframed history not just as a list of failures, but as proof of humanity's stubborn drive to build, create, endure. It offered a kind of psychological boost, a reminder of our capacity for good, even amongst all the follies.
And right at the center of their approach, kind of their North Star, was the general reader, Hermé. This whole massive thing was written explicitly for them. Not for specialists, not for academics hashing it out in journals. Their main audience. Educated, middle-class Americans, people looking for broad knowledge, maybe a bit of cultural refinement. Joan Shelley Rubin pointed out it was like an outline approach. It gave readers this assurance that, hey, everything you need to make sense of the world, it's right here between these covers. That's a powerful promise.
Yeah, and focusing on that general reader shaped everything. The depth they went into, the complexity they allowed, the whole narrative style. The Durants clearly understood their audience wanted synthesis. They wanted meaning, especially in an era where everything was getting so specialized, so fragmented. Academics were digging deeper into narrower holes, right? The Durants offered this grand, unifying overview. It tells you a lot about the intellectual curiosity back then. People wanted broad cultural literacy. It was almost a self-education movement, and this series became like the ultimate home library. They really tapped into a deep public need to make sense of it all.
So how did they actually define civilization?
Yes.
That's pretty fundamental to the whole project. Their main idea, their thesis, was that civilization is basically social order promoting cultural creation. And they broke it down into 4 key things. You need economic provision, political organization, moral traditions, and then the pursuit of knowledge and the arts. It's a pretty wide net.
That definition really is the foundation. It dictates what they include, what they emphasize across all those centuries. It's not just about empires and battles. It's about the conditions that let culture blossom, that let humans flourish. And building on that definition, they put forward several key arguments consistently throughout the series. First, this idea of a cyclical yet progressive view of history. Civilizations rise and fall, sure, but human knowledge, culture, that stuff accumulates over time. We build on what came before. Think Greek philosophy influencing Roman law, shaping European thought later on. It gives you a hopeful long view, you know. Despite setbacks, humanity kind of edges forward. Second, they stress the interdependence of civilizations. Different cultures add essential pieces to the puzzle. Now, we'll circle back to the critique about the Western focus here, but their intent was to show this global tapestry. Third, a really big one for them. Ideas shape reality. Philosophy, religion, culture, these aren't just side notes. They drive historical change. The impact of Christianity, the Enlightenment, huge drivers. And finally, they tried to balance individual agency and larger forces. Yeah, great individuals matter, Alexander Napoleon, but they're always working within these bigger currents, economic, social, cultural trends that set the stage. So these arguments show history isn't just random events. It's this ongoing story, building on itself, shaped by big ideas and collective action.
Okay, let's unpack the Durant's persuasive toolkit. How did they actually pull this off? How did they use ethos, pathos, logos to keep people hooked for thousands of pages? Starting with trust, their ethos, how did they build credibility? Well, they included this rigorous scholarly apparatus,
Yeah.
extensive footnotes, huge bibliographies, careful citations in every volume. It screams thorough research. Their approach was synthetic, weaving together tons of primary and secondary sources.
That scholarly foundation is absolutely key. It gives them the grounding to make those big sweeping statements. But their ethos wasn't just footnotes. They cultivated this balanced perspective. They really tried to be fair, to understand rather than just judge. One reviewer said they presented history without any repetitive analysis or overgeneralizations, aiming to understand and forgive rather than to critique and vilify. That suggests a kind of impartiality which builds trust. And importantly, they showed intellectual humility. They admitted history is tough, that our knowledge is always incomplete. In the Lessons of History, that short summary they did, they flat out say our knowledge of the past is probably inaccurate, be clouded by ambivalent evidence and biased historians. Being upfront about the limits, paradoxically, makes them more credible. Plus, you have Will Durant's Declaration of Interdependence in the 40s, arguing for racial equality. That adds a layer of moral authority. So it's this combination, the research, the fairness, the humility, the ethical stance that builds this deep trust with the reader. You feel like you're in good hands.
And beyond the logic and trust, they were masters at engaging emotions, at using pathos. They didn't just write a chronicle, they wrote a compelling story, filled it with memorable characters and dramatic events. You actually feel invested in these people from centuries ago.
Absolutely. They knew history has to connect emotionally to stick. They infused it with an inspirational vision, always highlighting human achievement, human potential. Will Durant wrote about history having the patience and skill of artists, giving last form to transient beauty and the vision of prophets, challenging us to nobility. That's not just reporting, it's inspiring. They did this by tapping into universal human themes: love, death, ambition, creativity, the search for meaning. These things resonate across time. You identify with historical figures because you recognize something of yourself in their struggles. That connection makes the information memorable. It's not just facts, it's human experience. And even though they cover tragedies, the overall optimistic tone offers encouragement. It suggests that despite everything, progress is possible. That blend of drama, inspiration, universal themes, that's how they kept it from being dry. It's crucial for keeping you engaged over, 13,000 pages.
Right. And then there's the logos, the logical structure that holds it all together. They used a clear chronological framework, moving through time logically. But within each period, they developed themes. And crucially, they practiced interdisciplinary integration. They didn't just stick to political history, they wove in philosophy, art, literature, economics, sociology. They called it a holistic perspective. And that's what really makes it richer than a simple timeline.
That interdisciplinary approach is a real signature of their work, making complexity manageable. They went beyond just describing things. They engaged in causal analysis. They didn't just say what happened, they explored why. Looking at how ideas, economics, social movements all interacted. Take the fall of Rome. They wouldn't just list invasions. They'd analyze the interplay of economic problems, maybe moral shifts, political chaos, military issues, the whole web of causes. They also used a comparative method, comparing cultures across time to spot patterns, maybe comparing ancient empires to modern nations to highlight enduring themes of power. And of course, underpinning it all were evidence-based arguments, specific examples, quotes from primary sources, data where available. This strong logical structure is the backbone. Combining chronology with themes and different disciplines gives you a much richer, more connected understanding than just a straight line of dates and events. You start to see how everything fits together.
It's really something how they managed that rigor but kept it so readable. Which brings us to the art of their storytelling, the language, the style. They were just masters of language. They made a conscious choice for accessible diction. Clear, engaging words, not dense academic jargon designed to keep people out. Their writing's been called remarkably accessible, even engaging, and able to lift philosophic prose into the realm of poetry. That's high praise.
It is. Making philosophy poetic, bringing that literary grace to history, that's a rare skill. And they weren't afraid of figurative language. Metaphors, vivid images, they use them all the time to make abstract ideas feel concrete, stick in your mind. Remember Durant describing his writing as like a crackling fire, which comforts the soul, fills the entire room with its illumination. That's not just description, it's evocative, it pulls you in. They're balanced syntax, too. They varied sentence length, kept the rhythm interesting. Long sentences building arguments, shorter ones driving home key points. And while it was accessible, they still had this authoritative tone. Dignified, serious, but with a warmth that invited you in. These stylistic choices, they really do turn it from just a history book into a literary experience. It's a huge part of why it appealed so widely and lasted so long.
And looking beyond the sentence level, they were architects of the narrative structure itself, organizing this immense amount of stuff. Their synthetic organization meant each volume wove together multiple threads: politics, economics, religion, art. It showed how interconnected everything was in a particular era. They didn't just tackle one thing at a time.
Right? That synthetic view is crucial for a project this big. It helps you see the whole picture of a civilization, not just slices. They also practiced proportional emphasis. They gave more space to things that seemed more significant in a given period. Religion gets more weight in the age of faith than in the age of reason, which makes sense. The transitional continuity between volumes is really smooth. You see how one period grows out of the last? They built bridges, showing it's one continuous human story. And a key element for coherence was thematic recurrence. Big ideas, the role of genius, freedom versus order, cycles of civilization, they pop up again and again across the centuries. That helps you see the enduring patterns. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis. This careful structuring really provided the framework needed for such a monumental work.
They also used some pretty advanced analytical techniques, didn't they, to make it more insightful, more engaging intellectually, like historical personification, giving human traits to eras or concepts, making them more vivid, like saying the Roman Empire grew weary or the Enlightenment awakened Europe.
Yeah, that personification makes abstract forces feel more alive, easier to grasp. It adds a literary touch to the analysis. They were also good at dialectical thinking, presenting opposing ideas or forces in tension, showing how history often moves forward through that conflict and eventual synthesis. Think about the Reformation. They wouldn't just list events. They'd explore that tension between Luther's radical ideas and the Church's need for stability, showing how that clash drove massive change. They also employed perspective shifts, sometimes zooming in on individuals, sometimes pulling back to look at broad social forces or cultural movements. Gives you a more rounded view. And crucially, unlike some narrative histories, they consistently practiced philosophical integration, connecting events back to those bigger questions about human nature, progress, meaning. These techniques really do elevate it beyond just a timeline. They pull you into a deeper intellectual conversation with the past, turning facts into insights about the human condition. It's quite masterful.
Okay, let's talk about the impact and the debates that still swirl around the story of civilization. It's as interesting as the book itself. First, you just have to acknowledge the achievement, the strengths. It sold over 2 million copies, remained bestsellers for decades. That's just incredible for this kind of work.
The numbers are staggering, really. They speak volumes about how it connected with people. And academics, even while having critiques, often praise their knack for making the past feel immediate and vivid for the general reader. Bridging that gap, its comprehensive scope was unprecedented for a popular work. It let readers see patterns across vast stretches of time and different cultures, offering a perspective you couldn't easily get elsewhere. The sheer narrative power kept people reading through thousands of pages. They made history genuinely gripping. And the philosophical depth, weaving in those bigger questions, gave it intellectual weight beyond just dates and names. It really did become a household name, shaped historical literacy for generations. It set a kind of gold standard for popular history that was also deeply researched.
But like any massive project, especially one from a specific era, it has its limitations, its shadows, and we need to talk about those, honestly. A big one, maybe the most discussed, is the Eurocentric bias. Despite the title, the focus is overwhelmingly on Western civilization. Europe gets the lion's share of attention. Civilizations in Africa, Asia, the pre-Columbian Americas, they get much less space, or are often viewed mainly through their interactions with Europe. The depth on the Renaissance versus, say, Song Dynasty China is starkly different.
That bias is really important for us to acknowledge today. It definitely reflects the cultural assumptions of its time, when Western history was often seen as the main story of civilization. And it significantly shapes the narrative you get. It presents a view of human development, heavily weighted towards Europe. Recognizing that bias helps us read it critically now, understand its context, and know that we need to seek out other perspectives, for a truly global picture. Beyond that, critics point to methodological issues, occasional factual errors, interpretations that are now outdated based on newer scholarship, sometimes simplifying complex events. The reliance on secondary sources, sometimes, though often the best available then, led to generalizations that historians have since refined. And the sheer scope inevitably means oversimplification at times. You lose nuance when you compress centuries into paragraphs. Finally, yeah, the work reflects certain cultural assumptions of mid-20th century America about progress, what civilization means, human nature that might not fully align with how scholars see things today. The whole rise and fall model, while dramatic, can sometimes obscure other kinds of historical change. So yeah, hugely influential, still valuable, but you read it now with these things in mind. Use it as a starting point, maybe, not the final word.
Absolutely. And yet, despite all the debates, the valid criticisms, the enduring legacy is undeniable. They pioneered rhetorical innovations, techniques for writing popular history effectively that still influence writers today trying to reach a broad audience.
They absolutely did. Their focus on synthesis, narrative drive, philosophical reflection, it created a powerful model for accessibility. Showed how you could make deep knowledge engaging for almost anyone. And for us today, reading it also offers this fascinating insight into mid-20th century American intellectual life. What questions were people asking? What kind of knowledge were they seeking? The strategies they used blending storytelling with big ideas are still incredibly relevant for anyone trying to communicate complex subjects clearly and effectively, trying to spark curiosity beyond just academia. And remember, you can explore more AI book analysis designed to inspire reflection and rational thought on our Mindful Moments YouTube channel. Ultimately, even with the scholarly debates, creating such a coherent, compelling story out of the sheer messy complexity of human history, that's a remarkable rhetorical achievement. It really stands as a monument to the power of historical synthesis.
So, as we wrap up thinking about the story of civilization, what does it ultimately tell us about that human need to find patterns, find meaning in the past? And how do we today navigate a work like this? Appreciate the genius, sure, but also critically assess its context, its biases. It's a balancing act, isn't it?
I think it serves as this powerful reminder that history isn't just a static collection of facts. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's shaped by who is telling the story and why. It really challenges us to ask, okay, what story of civilization are we telling today, and who is it for? It pushes us to be critical consumers and maybe creators of historical narratives, to seek out different voices, question the frames we're given. It's really a call to keep learning, keep thinking mindfully.
And if you want to dive deeper into the story of civilization yourself, maybe start that journey, click the link you see on screen. It'll take you to the in-depth summary of Volume 1, Our Oriental Heritage, where the Durants began their epic narrative. Please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives like this one. Share this conversation if you found it valuable, maybe with others who are curious about the grand sweep of history. And if you're ready to tackle the book itself, consider using the purchase link provided. Don't forget to check out our Mindful Moments and other podcasts for more AI-powered book analysis. But most importantly, keep thinking critically. Keep questioning the stories that shape how we understand our world.